Welcome to another episode of the $5 Million Milestone Podcast, where Tim Kelsey and I dive deep into what it really takes to grow a successful digital marketing agency. We don't just talk about the highlights, we get into the trenches of the struggles, challenges, and breakthrough moments that define the entrepreneurial journey. Today, we're joined by Brad Farris, founder of Anchor Advisors and a seasoned coach who specializes in guiding agency founders through their most challenging growth phases. Brad has an incredible background transitioning from engineering to business coaching, and he's developed a powerful framework that helps identify and navigate the critical stages of agency growth. So if you've ever felt like your agency is hitting a ceiling or that growth has suddenly become more painful than profitable, this episode is for you. With no further ado, hi, Brad. Welcome to the program, and how are you today?
Oh, man, thanks for having me. I'm fired up.
All right, awesome. So let's get going, and just to kind of get our audience to know you, just tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to start Anchor Advisors, and what we're very excited to learn more about, sort of the framework you've developed to help agency owners.
Yeah, I had a corporate career and ended up working for a billionaire who, the thing about billionaires is that their kids want to live in the same manner as their parents. And so every 25 years, you'd sort of need exponentially more cash in order to put gas in the jets and buy the horses and all that stuff. And so toward the end of my time there, I was working with a team who was buying small businesses that we thought would be able to grow large enough to be able to put gas in the jets and buy the horses and that sort of stuff. And so I had a really interesting experience moving from engineering into this group where we were buying businesses. I was sort of the nerd that spoke business, or the business guy that spoke nerd, depending on which side of that you were on. And so we looked at over 100 businesses. We made bids on about 15. We bought about 10. And so that gave me a really interesting insight into where businesses get stuck and what people value when they decide that they want to exit a business. And after doing that for about a decade, we bought businesses all over the country. I ran a couple of the businesses, but never anything in Chicago where I lived. And so I decided in 2001 that there must be a way to do this in Chicago, left the billionaire and started working with entrepreneurs to help them to grow their businesses. And early on, had a bunch of agency clients. And I was like, wait a minute, there's no inventory and no CapEx. You mean I just hire someone, I give them a computer and a phone and they make money for me? This is an amazing business. And so since then, I've been working with agency owners.
Very cool.
Nice. And Brad, just to kind of give us a sense of those businesses you were evaluating, what were the revenue range they were in?
So the interesting thing about billionaires is they don't like small deals. So the smallest deal we would do was around $20 million. On the top side, we bid on First Alert at one point, which was a $60-70 million business. We acquired a group of 4 companies for a couple of $100 million. They were all smaller-ish companies, but mostly what it was entrepreneurs that had grown their business to as big as they knew how to grow it. And they needed either outside capital or outside leadership to take it to the next level. And so those were the things that we were looking for, was sort of where the entrepreneur had stalled out. And we wanted to be buying from the entrepreneur when we could.
Interesting. Yeah. And because obviously we want to focus a lot on, how do you get from 1 million to 5 million and beyond.
Yeah.
So kind of what led you then sort of to look at agencies? I guess you mentioned, they had a sort of a unique business model.
Yep.
And sort of eventually kind of how you kind of sort of settled on sort of maybe smaller agencies than the businesses you were evaluating, and kind of looking at sort of that sort of key adolescent phase, which would be great to hear more from you as well.
So when I started working with agencies, the people that I met most easily were smaller agencies. There's more of them, right? But when I got inside and looked at them, what I saw was the difference between that and that 10, 20, $30 million business. There were some easy places to see where the differences were. And one of the critical things was the role of the CEO. In that $30 to $50 million business, the CEO is just a leader. They hold almost no client relationships, maybe just the one, the largest client relationship of the company. And most of their day is spent supporting the management team who's doing the work. In the smaller agencies, it was exactly the opposite. The business owner was doing most of the work with the team supporting them. It was almost like a hub and spoke where the owner's in the middle and the team's kind of around the outside, and the owner's dishing off tasks, but holding on to all the responsibility. And so it got really clear really fast how that was holding back the growth of the agency, that there's no one who's doing the leadership stuff, who's looking forward about what's changing in the marketplace and what skills or talents do we need in order to meet that changing marketplace, because everyone's down in the weeds just trying to get the payroll paid. And so that was one of the first things I observed is helping the owner themselves to pull themselves out of the day-to-day client work so that they could spend more time doing the leadership work.
Did noticing those differences in companies in these different stages lead to you? I mean, I think you've structured your coaching around these stages from startup up to expansion, I think it is. Can you tell us a bit about those stages and how you got around to developing that as sort of like the core of your coaching method?
So one of the things I learned as I was working with these agencies is that they were most concerned about the next problem they needed to solve. Like looking at the whole trajectory, for many of my clients, they're already working in the biggest business that they've ever been a part of, right? Like many of them have never worked in a big business. And so to talk about the vision for having a whole middle management team and how that operates, that was sort of like speaking Swahili to them. And so looking at what is the next change that you need to make to get you to the next level, that turned out that I found that to be a more productive conversation. And so I started breaking the journey down into these stages. And so the early stage is the startup phase. In the startup phase, which every business starts in the startup phase, right? So we've all experienced it. Our goal is not to go out of business next month, right? So we're trying to acquire enough customers and to figure out how to deliver enough value to keep the engine going. And the primary challenge is business acquisition. And then behind that, the secondary challenge is how to build a process to deliver the services. And the developmental challenge, if you will, the way that you know that you're leaving the startup phase is you start to think about service market fit. Instead of trying to serve anybody, instead of grabbing any piece of business that comes along, you start to think about, well, what are we particularly good at? And who is it that really values that thing? And to position our service in such a way that those people are drawn to the service that we have to offer. So that's the job in the startup phase, is to find some kind of service market fit where you are serving a particular group of people with a service that's built for them, so that when they see it, they're like, oh, I've been waiting for that, right? So that's the first challenge in the startup phase. Questions about that? Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, that does make sense. I think it's, a natural struggle for someone who's in that ownership position of a startup, because I think we're all familiar with doing the work. And we've all had jobs at some point where you have a task, you do the task, you do the next task. And it's a very straightforward, like day-to-day job, easy to grasp. And it's that shift into the next mindset of, I need to be working on the business, not talking to clients every day. I need to be building a team that I can delegate to, not being the choke point of everything getting approved or things like that. So I've talked to a lot of early stage agency owners who have struggled through that and have a tough time pulling themselves out. They're so busy with the day-to-day work, they don't see how to get out of that into the next stage of their business.
And that's really what starts to happen in the growth phase, is that once we find that service market fit, now, and this is really a challenge for creative folks, is that once you find the service market fit, what you want to do is do that thing over and over again, right? You have this service that you're offering to a type of client, and you want to create a repeatable process for that. And creative people kind of bristle at the idea of, well, I can't do the same thing over and over again. But there's still creativity to be had in the work. You're just not reinventing the process every time. And so the work in the growth phase is to build that repeatable process. How is it that we do this thing? How do we measure it? What are the roles that we do it? Do we have a project management tool that we're using to coordinate it? And by putting all of those systems in place, we go from being able to do 6 or 7 projects at a time to being able to do 15 or 20 projects at a time. And that's what allows us to see the growth. So the startup phase usually lasts to around $1 million in annual revenue. And then the move from the beginning of the growth phase to the end of the growth phase takes you to about $5 million. And that growth phase can happen relatively quickly if you put the work into building the systems. And during that phase, you're going to start to move from what we talked about, that hub and spoke, to more of that command and control structure where you have, in the early stages, you hire young, flexible, inexpensive people because you don't really know what you want them to do, right? And so we hedge our hiring risk by hiring cheap. But when we get to the growth stage, what we want to do is hire experts. We want people who have a track record of being successful at something. So when we hire a director of accounts, we want someone who knows how to do account management. When we hire a creative director, we want someone who has a track record of doing great creative work. And so the roles start to specialize and get more narrow. And that allows us to hire better people. They're going to cost us more, but we can put more work underneath them. We can get more dollars per employee through the business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that you touched on the specialization needed there to really succeed in the growth stage. I'm kind of interested in hearing about how that conversation goes with the agency owners you work with, because I've seen occasions where there's a lot of overthinking involved in picking a specialization. And sometimes, even in your case, it's as simple as, I happen to get this type of client. I got a handful of these. It worked out well. I like working with them. It's an interesting industry to work in. I'm going to go do that. And it doesn't have to be this, I'm going to do research the addressable market and see how many billions of dollars these companies have in total. Just sort of do what kind of came naturally to the business is an okay way to approach that. So I'm kind of interested in hearing more about how you approach that with the owners that you coach.
I love that you brought that up, because so much of startup and growth phase culture comes out of the Silicon Valley kind of ecosystem. And what you have to understand about Silicon Valley companies is, if you didn't build $1 billion company, you failed, right? That every Silicon Valley company needs tens of thousands of customers. In your creative firm, you need 10, 20 customers. In a given year, you're probably going to turn over half of your roster. So if you have 20 total customers, you're looking for 10. You don't need a gigantic addressable market. You need a market that you can reach easily and that see you as meaningfully different. And so it's all of that researching the target market and finding expensive problems. If you can just meet some people and talk to them, you can find a lot of niches that you can fill. And so when people are asking about this, what I usually tell them to do is just call up some people that you think are in your target market and ask them, tell them you're doing some market research. Would you spend 20 minutes on the phone with me? And ask them, how do you hire an agency? What are the problems you're solving? When you're hiring an agency, what works for you and what doesn't work for you? What was your best agency experience? What was your worst agency experience? Just listen to what people are saying, and 10 calls in, you'll be really clear about what it is that you need to do. And then you're going to, it's not like a lifetime sentence. You're going to shift that over time. I mean, hopefully, and we'll talk about this as we get to the stabilization phase, the way that we eventually grow past 5 million is not by getting more clients, it's by getting bigger clients. And as we move up the food chain, we have to evolve that product market fit to match the needs of those larger clients. So this isn't like something you're going to do for the rest of your life. This is something you're going to do for 2 or 3 years. And then you're going to incrementally shift that as the market needs change.
Yeah, and I think you might, when you're doing that market research, talking to people, business owners in a certain industry, some of those calls might turn into sales too, just
Oh
because
my God.
you're asking the right questions and actually listening to them and not selling them anything. Sometimes that just leads to like, oh, wow, I actually do need help with this. And it sounds like you're really thinking about my industry. You get it. Let's figure something out and work together.
What I tell clients is, if you do 10 of those calls and don't have 2 new clients, you're really doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I'm going to bet you're going to have 4 new clients if you do 10 of those calls.
Yeah.
Because exactly what you're saying, because you're being curious and not self-interested, people are like, is that something you could help me with? Well, we could talk about that, like.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of this is sort of Pronto's story in some ways. I mean, we started with our focus on IT companies, and Derek, the founder, just called his friends that he knew from his days of working at Microsoft, and those were our original clients, and that's why we specialized in IT companies. And yeah, sort of as we built up that that client base, we saw the need for that next transition as well into stabilization of not just selling them a low-cost website support subscription, also selling them $1,000 plus SEO programs and Google Ads and all these other things that would greatly impact the value of a client and their lifetime value with us. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that phase and what comes after that growth.
So once you have the signal that you're exiting the growth phase is that you have a scalable process. In other words, you have a thing that you do and you can do it over and over again fairly reliably. And some of the clients that I'm working with will say, Brad, it's actually getting a little boring. Like nothing ever goes wrong. Things just we're kind of turning the crank and things are good. And so when you get to that point, now you're looking at the stabilization phase. And what happens in the stabilization phase is 2 things. Number one, because the business owner is now completely removed from the client service, we need to have better reporting systems so that we can see what's happening 2 layers down in the organization. There's a fully functioning middle management layer, and they're giving you their reports, but you really need better data to start to see where the opportunities are to grow the business. And so, if you think about that typical $1 to $5 million company, they've got a separate CRM and a separate financial system, and then they've got some kind of marketing system that they're using, marketing automation, and there's all these disparate systems, and the data coming out of those isn't looking at the same things, and so you try to aggregate it in some kind of spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet has all kind of formula errors, and so people don't trust it, so then they have their own spreadsheet, and so everyone's arguing about the data. Everybody has their own sets of data. And so what is really important is to get to one source of truth. And so you need to develop a system where you have your one source of truth in the stabilization phase. And there are lots of ways that can happen. I mean, there are monolithic systems that people adopt. There are some systems that are stable that are aggregating data from multiple systems, but you're working out how to normalize that data so that we're all talking about the same numbers. And the leadership challenges there are much more about leading through your leaders. And so, whereas in the growth phase, you're still leading people sort of directly, in the stabilization phase, you, as the owner, you really mess things up if you start jumping levels. And so there's a different kind of leadership that takes place there where you're more setting direction and then creating kind of boundary conditions and then letting your team take the reins to move the business forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it a bit in terms of being able to hold your managers accountable. It's one thing for a manager to come to you and say, my team's really busy, we need to hire someone. And as much as you want to trust that manager to have an understanding of what's needed for their team, you're going to want hard data before you give approval to let's go spend another $4,000 or $5,000 a month hiring this specialized person or whatever it might be. And so that feels so important to know, have everybody on the same page and say, in that one-on-one, a manager saying, my team needs this. Yeah, okay, let's pull up our data, look at this, and decide together if that's really the right thing to do or not. So you shouldn't be making decisions like that based on the feelings of people. Or, I mean, a frontline team member is, of course, going to say more help would be good. and just say,
Exactly.
yes, we're busy, we have a lot of stuff,
Right.
but there's data that really says, is the team falling behind? Do we really need more help in this particular area? So I love that idea of having like a centralized system. We've struggled with that at times ourselves because we've done exactly what you described there. We have a billing tool, we have a CRM, we have a marketing automation tool, we have our accounting tool. It's all spread out everywhere. But it actually is a huge pain to bring that all together. We've tried things like Tableau, we've tried building our own systems. It's very hard, a big challenge to solve, but a very necessary one.
And the example you just brought up is a great one. A regular conversation that I'm having with clients is they're saying, well, my delivery team is telling me that they're so busy, but we're not that profitable.
Mm-hmm.
So are we pricing this wrong, or are they not really as busy as they say they're busy? You know, like they're pulling the pieces of that apart to figure out where the system is falling apart requires much more sophisticated data to be able to see what's going on. And one of the other things that you're bringing up there that I didn't mention about the growth phase, but you know, in the startup phase, it's kind of every man for themselves. If there's a problem, the whole team kind of gangs onto things, right? In the growth phase, when we hire specialists, we want to develop accountability processes because the account person doesn't want to get blamed for the problems that are happening in the delivery team or vice versa. As that scales and the problems get more sophisticated and the team members are more capable, they get better at telling a story about why it's somebody else's problem, right? And so that, because each department has their own source of truth, they can make a really great argument about why it's not my problem, it's their problem. And so that's why another reason that we have to start pulling this together is that we need everybody to see the same data so that we're all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, we've definitely experienced that. Like even in a fairly small team, it'll be the project managers are blaming the copywriters who are blaming the designers, and it's always pass the buck. And I mean, there's been times when we just said, okay, everybody in the office, we're going to have a meeting. We're all going to talk through this together because it's clear everybody's just focused on their own little portion of this project. No one's thinking about, is the whole big picture actually working well together? So yeah, there's so easy to be infighting as you get to this stage and people start to get their specialization and sort of feel territorial almost about what they are responsible for, and that no, it can't be my problem. My team can't be the one screwing up here. We work really hard. It's these other people that are lazy.
And there could well be compensation consequences. You know, as people's compensation rises, I recommend making a larger portion of it variable. And so if a large portion of your compensation is variable, then that data becomes really important for people.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. I like that take. I'm wondering if the stabilization phase do a lot of companies just sort of hang out there? I mean, with the word stabilization, it's sort of like you've reached this point of it's all working well and running smoothly. You've grown to a decent degree. How would an owner know that they're ready for that next and final stage? Or do some owners just decide I'm cool here and I'm just going to chill and run my business and retire one day?
So it is very tempting to hang out in the stabilization phase. You're at a place where you can take a couple weeks vacation pretty easily. The business is probably throwing off a reasonable amount of cash so that your financial needs are well taken care of. And it seems like a good idea just to kind of cruise. And you can for a while. Like I've seen people that are 5, 8, 10 years in that stabilization phase and everything is pretty good. The challenge is for your team that you're okay with your business not growing any further, but your team doesn't want to stay in the same job year after year after year. And in fact, they want to be able to make more money and learn new things and take on new challenges. And so if the business itself isn't growing, then you start to have a turnover problem among your best people, among the people that you don't want to have lose, because they're the ones that are ambitious and want to grow. And so the problem with trying to stay at a certain size is that your team is going to abandon you. Now, there are firms that are able to replace and they're really good at growing from within. And so when those people leave, there's someone behind them that can fill that. And so that's a valid choice to manage that problem, but that's the problem you end up with if you try to stay in that, $5 to $10 million kind of range. But there's an opportunity to go beyond that. And for some people, they really want to have that larger exit, or they want to have more influence or impact. And what happens then after the stabilization phase is that there's an opportunity to use other people's money to massively grow the business. And so here, whether it's an acquisition strategy, a private equity roll-up kind of situation, or some product development, service development work, the answer is typically to bring in some outside money to sell some portion of the operation, so that with that money, you can then create a much larger enterprise. So let's say you're a $10 million company that is focused on a particular region or a particular vertical market. So if you're in a vertical market, there can be a lot of value in adding ancillary services so that you get more share of wallet from that ideal customer, right? And so you can go out and buy some smaller agencies that do things that are sort of connected to what you do, so that you can get more money out of your existing clients. Another strategy then is to grow geographically, whether it's in different regions of the country or different regions of the world, where you start to acquire the ability to service clients over a larger geography that can bring in that larger valuation. And so when you go from a $10 million company, a $10 million company is going to sell for, 5 to 8 times EBITDA. If you can get to a $50 million company, that company might sell for a 10 to 15 times EBITDA. So you can double the value of your portion of the equity if you can grow the business pretty significantly. And so when you bring in other people's money, yes, they come along for the ride, but you end up with more money at the end of the day also.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's I think that's the phase where Pronto is today. And we're experiencing some of those challenges where we have team members who are just sort of tired of waiting for a promotion because there isn't a promotion available. And we've been in this stabilization phase for a long time now, and are just now starting to look at acquisitions. Last year, we acquired a few small agencies just to test the waters, and want to jump deeper into it this year and hopefully really expand what we're able to do. Because we've noticed that as well, where your strongest team members are the ones who want to keep growing in their careers. And if they've reached whatever senior developer or team manager or something, and it's that's the ceiling of what is feasible at the moment, then at some point they're going to get bored and say, I'm going to go look somewhere else, and you lose them and you have to go. I can see that someone could choose to stay in that and just be like, okay, we're going to grow people and replace and hire fresh grads and get really good at growing people from within. But one way or the other, there's always those problems. There's never a point where the business can just totally coast in your hands free and never have to worry about anything. You either choose to stay with the stabilization problems and deal with it, or choose to take on the risk and the stress and all the problems that come with trying to expand and having a new partner that you have to report to, and that's holding you accountable for all the money that they just gave you and things like that. All of that is super interesting to look through that entire process. In your experience, is there any particular transition between stages that seems the hardest for agency owners to accept, or have the mindset shift needed to go through? What do people struggle with the most?
Going from that hub and spoke to the command and control is a huge fundamental shift, not just in the way that you're thinking about your business, but actually in your own identity, right? You probably started this agency because you were a designer, account manager, SEO, developer, whatever it was. And as you move into that growth phase, you're giving up that technical skill. You know that if I step back and do this leadership, up until that point, the worst thing that could happen was you'd go get a job, right? But when you cross that threshold, you rapidly realize that your technical skills are decaying, and the idea of getting a job is no longer viable.
I've thought about that. I feel like the only job I'm qualified for now is running an agency. And
Right.
like, what would I go do? It'd be really hard to transition to something else.
And I don't know about you, but in my corporate days, when I saw a resume where someone had been self-employed, like there's this immune system in corporations where they're like, oh, that guy's got the bug. Like, we can't let him in. Like, he's not going to stay. He's never going to be willing to plug himself back into the matrix, right? And so, like, you become kind of unemployable. And so that is a difficult transition mindset-wise. The thing that's interesting about it is that it's sort of a burn your boats moment, right? Like, once you've done it, then you have to keep going because there's no going back, right? Mm-hmm. And so the in a way, it's sort of like the Stephen Pressfield idea of going pro. Like, you're not dabbling anymore. You're all in at that point. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, that's a really fun group of people to work with when they're going from that growth phase toward the stabilization phase. All the other phases are really interesting, but that phase, like, there's a commitment level that is visceral, that can drive a lot of change.
Yeah, I think there's also a realization at some point that you are responsible for other people. It's not just you making money for yourself anymore. It's you have employees who paychecks, you have to make sure they get paid every month, and they're counting on that money to come in. And if your business fails, then you've put all of these people who have been depending on you in a really tough position as well.
Yeah. That in COVID, I heard that a lot. People were really concerned about what's happening. You know, it's not just me, but it's my people and their families that are all dependent on us making it through this.
I'll have one more question for you. So for someone who's maybe in that startup or growth phase and they're starting to deal with all the new things that come in with that, is there one, or maybe we'll say 1 to 2 key metrics that you think are like the most critical for them to be paying attention to help them understand where they are in a particular phase of their business?
Well, I actually, on my website, if you go to anchoradvisors.com/growth-phase, I have an assessment there. It's just a quick 10 questions, and you don't need to give me your email address. I'll give you the answers right at the end of the assessment. That helps you to see where you are in those 4 phases. And then it gives you some specific recommendations about what you need to do to get from where you are to that next phase. And so that's what I would recommend, is just go and take the assessment and look at what it tells you about what the next things are. And if that isn't fitting for you, absolutely, shoot me an email. I'm happy to talk through that. And then if it is fitting for you, maybe there's something there that you need some help with, or that you can just go from there and say, oh, I get it. I know what I need to do. But that helps you to focus. I mean, one of the challenges, particularly in the growth and stabilization phase, is that there are a lot of things to work on. And choosing your priorities so that you're putting more effort behind a fewer number of initiatives is what allows that to move forward. And so focusing on just 1 or 2 things that can move you closer to that next phase.
Excellent.
Yeah, those are definitely things we experience ourselves, and we went through a very big sort of refocusing effort like a year or 2 ago. And, I think every time we stay focused, we see that things really pay off.
Yeah.
So thanks so much, Brad. This was a great conversation. Really enjoyed kind of learning your story and insights there. I think you touched on a lot of very important points, and the challenges that people have is they have to sort of reinvent their identity. I think the digital marketing field is a very fast evolving one as well, and even your SEO skills of 5-10 years ago are definitely becoming obsolete or evolving every day. And so those are things that, as agency practitioners, we have to sort of keep up with. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, but challenges as well there. So like I mentioned, I see a lot of our own agency journey and what we discussed, and the idea that we sometimes need to focus and do less to actually grow more is maybe counterintuitive, but it makes a lot of sense. And just to wrap things up, Brad, if our listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
The best thing is my website, anchoradvisors.com. I'm also on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Brad Farris. But yeah, the website is a great place to go.
All right. And so to our listeners, if today's episode resonated with you, be sure to check out Brad's assessment tool. We'll include a link in the show notes. And as always, subscribe to the $5 Million Milestone Podcast, leave us a review, and share the episode with another agency owner who might be facing those exact challenges. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and chasing that $5 million milestone.